The hits keep coming for Donald Trump and his allies. Just a little over an hour ago, a news story in the New York Times says a report President Trump himself has been anticipating for months from a Justice Department watchdog will undercut Trump's claim that the FBI spied on his 2016 campaign. A theory Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr also fueled in his testimony before Congress when he claimed that, quote, spying did occur. But the New York Times reports this. The Justice Department's Inspector General found no evidence that the FBI attempted to place undercover agents or informants inside Donald J. Trump's campaign in 2016, as agents investigated whether his associates conspired with Russia's election interference operation, people familiar with the draft of the Inspector General's report said. Now, the finding is one of several by Mr. Horowitz that undercuts conservatives' claims that the FBI acted improperly in investigating several Trump associates starting in 2016. The blow to a one-time favorite Trump talking point comes on a day of developments in the Ukraine scandal that are calling into question Donald Trump's chief impeachment defenses and bringing into focus the appearance that the president was withholding military aid from Ukraine despite multiple warnings from within his own administration that what he was doing might be wrong. Another report in today's New York Times reveals that Trump was briefed on the whistleblower complaint that ignited the entire Ukraine scandal well before he finally unfroze that aid. It poses a significant challenge to the claims we keep hearing from the president's allies that Trump's decision to ultimately release the assistance in mid-September proves he wasn't holding it up for any kind of corrupt purpose. The report also illustrates debate within Trump's West Wing over how to deal with the whistleblower complaint once it was relayed to the White House. The Times reporting this, quote, lawyers from the White House counsel's office told Mr. Trump in late August about the complaint, explaining that they were trying to determine whether they were legally required to give it to Congress, the people said. So this all means, according to the Times, that Trump was made aware of the complaint and the fact that it might soon become public before he assured Senator Ron Johnson there was no quid pro quo, and before he told Ambassador Gordon Sondland he wanted, quote, nothing from Ukraine. Conversations he and his allies have highlighted to suggest the scrutiny over the aid is all much ado about nothing.
Rather than ask the president 9 different questions, is it this, is it this, is it that, I just said, what do you want from Ukraine? I may have even used a 4-letter word. And he said, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I just want Zelensky to do the right thing, to do what he ran on, or words to that effect.
Well, here's my answer. I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky to do the right thing. Then he says, this is the final word from the President of the United States. I want nothing.
I was supporting the aid, as is Senator Murphy, as is everybody that went to that initial inauguration. But here's the salient point of why I came forward. When I asked the president about that, he completely denied it. He adamantly denied it. He vehemently, angrily denied it. He said, I'd never do that.
Of course, we now know that at the time, Trump was getting his allies on message. He was already aware he was in hot water over his conduct with Ukraine. All right, so here to talk through it all with us at the table, we have Axios political reporter Alexi McCammond, former DNC senior advisor Doug Thornell, and White House reporter for the LA Times, Eli Stokols, plus former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, and from the Washington Post, White House reporter Ashley Parker, and New York Times reporter who covers the FBI, Adam Goldman. And Adam, I want to start with you. Walk us through your new reporting on this Horowitz report.
Well, one of the claims that have been made by Trump and his allies is that the FBI had been spying on its campaign or possibly even tried to infiltrate it with an informant. So as part of the Justice Department Inspector General's investigation into the FBI's Russia investigation, they looked at this allegation and they did a deep dive on undercover agents the FBI might have used in this investigation or informants and determined that there was no evidence to support these allegations, much like some of the other theories that have been pushed by Trump's allies.
But your reporting also suggests that there is something of a mixed bag here, that there is something in the report. There are a few findings in the report that President Trump and his allies might cling to. So what are those exactly?
Look, there are a number of them. Clearly, there were some serious mistakes, errors and omissions made when putting together this wiretap application for surveillance on Carter Page, a former Trump campaign advisor. There were serious mistakes there, so let's not downplay that. And also, an individual, a lawyer at FBI headquarters, has been referred for criminal prosecution for altering an email involved in this wiretap application. So there were serious problems, and the IG is going to definitely ding the FBI hard over these, right? They're simply unacceptable when you're doing this kind of work. It was careless, sloppy, maybe even, unprofessional. But, then on the other side, the Dems can say, well, look at all these conspiracy theories that Republican, Trump allies and others floated, that, the dossier was used in the in the packet to open the actual investigation, the predicate to open the investigation. That's wrong. That, somehow the CIA was involved in the opening of the Russia investigation. That's wrong. That, this professor named Joseph Mifsud, who's been talked about, who had met with the Trump campaign advisor, George Papadopoulos, was somehow, being controlled by the FBI as part of a setup plot. That's wrong. And now, we know that, the leaders of the FBI didn't politicize this investigation, the Russia investigation, and nor did they try to infiltrate the campaign.
Tell us more about this man who investigates the investigators, right? Michael Horowitz, I understand he's a Democrat. He's an Obama appointee. Tell us more about him.
Michael Horowitz is a well-respected figure in the law enforcement community and in the Department of Justice, and he does tough investigations. He's known to be fair but tough. He did that previously on how the FBI acted in 2016. He certainly didn't give the leadership of the FBI a pass in how they handled the Hillary Clinton investigation, and particularly that press conference Comey held in July of 16, or the letters that were sent to Congress. In fact, he called Comey insubordinate. So he was certainly rough, and he beat the FBI up. Many people would say justifiably so. And, now he's coming back around and doing a deep dive. Horowitz has a real responsibility here, to cut through the clutter, to cut through these conspiracy theories and lay down the markers, what is true and what is not. And I think people believe he's going to do that.
Adam Goldman, thank you for joining us on this. We appreciate it. And Joyce Vance, over to you. This certainly does not paint a picture of some sort of deep state conspiracy. What it does, though, is shed new light on the Attorney General's role in this, given that, based on his comments, he seemed to have pumped up some sort of conspiracy. So what lasting thoughts does this leave you with?
Well, on two hands, as Adam pointed out, this discloses that there were some issues with one of the lawyers over at the FBI. Problems like that need to be rooted out. They need to be taken very seriously. The good news here is that there's no indication that that isolated issue impacted any of the other work that was being done by the FBI here. The Carter Page FISA ultimately did not result in a prosecution of Carter Page. And the important takeaway, as you point out, is that everything that President Trump has been saying for the last couple of years about the deep state and the effort by the Obama Justice Department to attack his campaign, that's all been made up. None of it was true, but it was fomented and it was really put into progress as much as by the president, by his Attorney General Bill Barr, who famously went in front of Congress and talked about spying, which is not what the Justice Department does. The Justice Department does court-ordered supervision or court-ordered evidence collection. The notion that the Attorney General would call it spying was shocking to many of us then, and the Inspector General report confirms that it was indeed untrue.
Let's turn back now to the impeachment inquiry and this reporting by the New York Times that President Trump knew about the whistleblower complaint when he ultimately released the aid to Ukraine. Gordon Sondland first suggested that in his testimony before the House Intelligence Committee, 2 weeks ago now, but now you have a couple of sources familiar telling the New York Times that in fact was the case. So, Alexei, help us understand what this means for the timeline and how this really builds Democrats' case.
Well, it certainly bolsters Democrats' argument that Trump only ultimately released that aid to Ukraine once he was caught, as Democrats say, because they launched their impeachment inquiry into him. And so they argue that he felt caught and sort of spooked by that, and that's what inspired him to do that. Now we also know that there were other pressure points coming from all different angles to the president. It was the fact that he knew that this whistleblower filed this complaint 2 weeks before he ultimately released the aid. And also within that time, after House Democrats launched their impeachment inquiry, he was pressured, according to Tim Morrison's testimony to the committee, by Mike Pence, his vice president, and Senator Rob Portman. So he not only has bipartisan pressure coming from different sides, but he also has the knowledge that this whistleblower filed a formal complaint that his lawyers didn't necessarily know how to handle and to what level it should be elevated. And so now we know the pressure, and that totally cuts into Republicans' arguments that, oh, no, there was no quid pro quo because, look, he released this aid.
Yeah.
But the question that President Trump and his lawyers need to be pinned down on is, why did he release that aid? We only have suggestions from Republicans who are, being extremely loyal to the president, but we need to hear from President Trump himself, or at least his lawyers.
And this reporting, Eli, it certainly helps explain why the president offered up unprompted. There was no quid pro quo in his conversation with Gordon Sondland, the president using that, legalistic language there in his conversation.
And he snapped at him, right? Yeah. Sondland's testimony is the president was in a bad mood. Senator Johnson, in his long letter that he put out last week, also described the president, when he was asked about this, being in a really upset mood and yelling at him. The president seemingly was aware of that he'd been found out. And when he got questioned, when the question was put to him, he was ornery about it. So I think you're seeing this composite picture of what was going on in the White House coming into place, into clearer view now. And it really does upend this defense that you've heard from Jim Jordan, from the president and others, that he released the aid after they just needed to vet Zelensky, make sure he was really committed to corruption. Mm-hmm. And actually, no, they released the aid because, as Adam Schiff says, they got caught. They were about to get found out. The complaint was already in the pipeline. And so it helps explain the motivations, helps explain why the president was upset about this. And it forces, like Alexei said, reporters, people to go back to the president and say, okay, you said this knowing that this was out there, that you were about to be revealed for what you were doing. Why, Trump last week was reading those notes. Yeah. He's reading the quote and just basically trying to take it out of one context and to put it into another.
Yeah, but I actually don't think it truly matters why he released the aid, in the sense that he committed the act that I believe is unpresidential and grounds for impeachment, which is holding up the aid for a long period of time in order to get a favor from a foreign country to investigate his political opponent. Yeah. That right there, I think, is grounds for his impeachment. Why he ultimately let the aid go, first of all, he's never going to admit to it. We all know this is all nonsense. The fact that we all knew that something was up when he actually used the term quid pro quo unprompted, right? We knew something was odd there. But to me, we already have enough information based off of everything that was laid out in the Select Intelligence Committee last week and all the other information to come to a decision on whether or not we believe he should be impeached. Yeah. Hey, Ashley Parker, at that rally last night in Sunrise, Florida, President Trump and his group of supporters there had a whole chant going, no quid pro quo, no quid pro quo. The White House strategy, such that there is one, seems to be to win whatever the day's news cycle is. So what are they saying for themselves right now?
That I told him, quote,
Well, first of all, that's always the president's strategy. The president, when people try to understand what he's doing, the easiest and clearest lens to understand it is this is someone who is trying to get through the minute, the meeting, the hour, the day, the news cycle. That's always what they're going to do. And what you're seeing is them trying to delegitimize the impeachment proceedings the way, for over a year, they tried in the court of public opinion, for instance, to delegitimize Mueller's report. And I think the most interesting thing about this is to see what decision they actually make on how to handle the fact that they now do have a seat at the table when this moves over to the House Judiciary Committee. This entire time, they have been complaining, Republicans have been complaining that they didn't have a seat, they didn't have a voice. Now they do, but I think for them, they need to figure out, do they take that seat and risk sort of giving some legitimacy to this being a real process, a bipartisan process, a process where the president's attorneys have a say, or is it more effective for the president to do what we saw him do last night, which is stand up there and rally his supporters? He said no quid pro quo. There are some other choice words he used, and make that case in the court of public opinion rather than in the halls of Congress.
Joyce Vance, one of the major defenses that we've heard from Republicans is that, and Senator Kennedy has said this to me, you don't know the president's intent, and so it's a mistake to draw inferences to assume culpability. But this reporting, I mean, it certainly speaks to what appears to be a consciousness of guilt. The president was briefed on this whistleblower complaint. He's telling Gordon Sondland, I don't want anything, no quid pro quo. What's your read on this?
You know, I think you're exactly right. This is evidence that he had guilty knowledge, that he had a corrupt intent when he engaged in this entire process, and that the aid was ultimately released only after they realized that the whistleblower was about to create problems for them. But the entire argument that Republicans are making here is a real non-starter, and I'll be a little bit on the legal nerdy side and just say it's very difficult for prosecutors to prove intent. It's hard to get inside of someone's head and know what they're thinking. So often prosecutors are in the position of using circumstantial evidence and drawing inferences and asking a jury to believe what prosecutors have concluded about someone's state of mind. Here, of course, the jury is the American people and the Senate, and the president has given people, the Democrats in Congress, plenty of information from which we can infer that there was, in fact, a corrupt scheme here, an abuse of power ongoing, with this being the linchpin evidence on the timeline, showing that once they knew that the gig was up and they were about to be discovered, they took steps to try to have this final defense of, well, we gave up the aid, so no harm, no foul.
And Eli, we can combine this with the transcripts we got last night from Mark Sandy, the OMB official, who testified willingly, a career official. And what struck me about his testimony was that he said that when he started asking questions about, you know, what's up with this Ukraine aid being withheld, he was ultimately sidelined and replaced by a political appointee, Michael Duffy, in much the same way that Marie Yovanovitch was ultimately sidelined and replaced with Gordon Sondland.
Right. Anybody who was in the way of what the president wanted to do was just moved out of the way. There were two OMB officials who resigned out of concern for what was happening. That was also in the transcript that we got last night. I mean, it was pretty clear, it seems like, to a lot of people in the executive branch what was going on, what the president was pursuing here. And anyone with concerns, anybody who was an impediment to the president pursuing this line, this sideline with Zelensky, they were just moved out of the way.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.